In addition, we have the considerations for existing data sets or new data sets that we are creating. In the case of an existing data set, what we need to specify the data set name and then the disposition. In other words, what, if anything, do we want the system to do with this data set once we're done processing it? In the event that we are creating a new data set, then again, we're going to have to specify the data set name. We're going to have disposition processing in terms of what we want done with it. We have to indicate the device type that it's going to, tape or disk. We have to give it space in the event that it's a disk data set. So we have to identify the amount of space we're willing to assign, as well as the data characteristics themselves. What is the block size? What is the logical record length? Those kinds of indicators as to the format of the data. So these are going to define the key parameters that you will run into in DD statements as they relate to existing or new data sets that you are processing. Despite the fact that there are a large number of parameters available, the overwhelming majority of your JCL will be confined to these few parameters. So these are the ones that we're going to be focusing on. And as we said with the job statement as well as the execute statement, there are extra DD statements that parameters that you can be coded. However, for the most part, these are going to be the ones that you primarily run into, and any variations or exceptions that you might have to deal with, you'll want to review in the JCL reference manual. Now, the dataset name parameter is required to indicate the dataset that we are working with. However, there are several variations on what can occur here. First, we can indicate we are working with an existing dataset, one that has a permanent name that's assigned to it that we can reference. In addition, we can specify a name if we are creating a new dataset that we want to retain and that we want to be able to reference in the future. In addition, we can specify a partition dataset name with a member. That's also a valid way of being able to access a specific member within a PDS. We also have the ability to generate temporary dataset names. And in this case, what would happen is that the system can generate a name for us, but the dataset will not be retained. It'll only be kept for the duration of the job, and then it will be automatically deleted. This would be the situation of where we might want to create some data that we want to pass to a subsequent step, but we have no intention of keeping the data set for future reference. And so in that situation, it could be useful to just code it as a temporary data set name. And even there, we have two variations that can occur. One, we can simply leave the data set name parameter off, in which case the system will generate a temporary data set name of its own choosing. However, if we intend to reference the dataset name, then we need to specify the ampersand and give it a name that we can use so that the system generated name in fact can be referred to. And those are some of the different mechanisms that are involved with respect to dataset name usage. And we'll take a look at how some of that works when we take a look at the demonstration at the end of this particular module. You can see that there are also referbacks here, and again, a little bit later in the module we will discuss referbacks more specifically, but the idea is that we can refer back to a previous step or a previous DD name and use that particular dataset name then as our reference. So rather than recoding it, we can simply refer to a previous definition. The dataset name itself has a maximum of 44 bytes. Which includes periods that are used to delimit what are referred to as the various qualifiers or the levels within the dataset name itself. Each level can be up to 8 bytes in length, and it's followed by a period. And so we would use a name, for example, like user.parmlib or prod.payroll.data, and that would indicate the various dataset names that we can use with a qualifier at each level. The highest level qualifier represents the name that is going to be used within the system's catalog to locate the dataset itself. The temporary dataset names always begin with an ampersand if they are going to be coded for reference. If we simply want a system-generated temporary dataset name, we don't have to code the dataset name parameter at all. However, the restriction there is that we cannot refer to that dataset name in any subsequent steps within the job. Referbacks, as we said, can be used then to reference previous definitions for a dataset. So if we had a dataset name that was used in a previous DD statement, or if it was used in a previous step, we can use the referback mechanism as the vehicle for referencing that particular dataset name. As we said, if the dataset name itself is simply left off, the system will generate a temporary dataset name to account for it. Here's some examples. In this case here, you can see we have a dataset name with 3 levels, user.jcl.library. As we said, each level can be up to 8 characters long, with the entire dataset name, including periods, with a maximum length of 44 bytes. In this case, we've specified a dataset name with a member in parentheses. Now, the member in parentheses does not count towards that 44-byte dataset length. So in this case here, if we have a partition dataset, we can refer to the specific member in parentheses. In this example, we are coding a temporary dataset name, where we have the ampersand results in the system generating a temporary name with user1 as a low-level qualifier. That way, if we want to refer to that dataset again, we can simply code the ampersand user1, and the system will relate that back to the previously created dataset. Datasets using this form are not retained across jobs. So once the job ends, that dataset is deleted automatically. However, within a job, you can have the references that refer back to previous invocations. And then, of course, you can see the example here of coding up a referback. The *.stepname.dd name indicates the previous step and the previous DD name that we are referencing to obtain our dataset name. We also have dataset concatenation. Now, as was mentioned previously, if we have a DD statement coded with no DD name, then it is assumed to be concatenated to the highest level DD name that we have. So in this case, the DD name would be sort in, and all of these other DD statements then are assumed to be concatenated. And all concatenation means is that we are treating these multiple data sets as if they were one large data set. This can be quite useful when we may have a variety of input sources that we want to process. Rather than copying them and consolidating them and doing all the things necessary to create one big data set, we can simply bring them in as individual data sets, but from the program perspective, treat them as if they were one data set.